The other day, I got to thinking about card games, and I'm not quite sure why, what jogged my memory, but it's something that I, in the course of my life, and particularly my childhood and my teens and 20s, spent a lot of time engaged in a lot of different modes, you could say. Sometimes it was a matter of finding a way to kill time or pass time. You know, it's a way to escape boredom, to engage your mind with something. A lot of times it was a way to have fun with people that I was friends with or family with or connected to in some other way. And the card games themselves could be, you could say, a means for enjoying the company of others. Sometimes it was about the challenge of the game itself or its intrinsic interestingness, you could say. At times I could get competitive about it as well. I'm not a big gambler. I have played some games of chance for money from time to time, as I'll tell you in a moment, but the competitive aspect was very often more in terms of bragging rights or the sheer involvement with somebody else who's playing against you, or a whole bunch of people that are playing against you. So I'm going to tell the story here of the different games that I've played. Perhaps you've played some of these. Maybe some of them are completely unfamiliar to you. But I think that it could be of some interest to others. And I do want to say this, that the playing of the card games is in many respects a function of having grown up in an era before the internet and before the, instantaneous updating of information, when life was, I don't want to say necessarily a little slower, but there was more space in it for the kinds of things that would be just casual card games. And that may not be quite so easy or readily available to those who've grown up, in the last several decades. So let me start at the beginning with my childhood. So, as a kid, in the kind of household that I grew up in the neighborhood I grew up in, with the kind of friends that I had, there were a lot of card games that you just kind of learned, right? And some of them are indeed childhood games like Go Fish and these are kind of like matching games. But one that we played a lot was War. And War can be done with 2 people, can be done with 3 people, it can actually be done with 4 people. And you're always trying to turn over cards and get the highest card, and whoever gets the highest card gets to take the trick and then put it at the bottom of their stack, and it goes for a while, and it's kind of a fun game. And if you have ties, then you have to you add some extra stuff to it, you could say. So we played a lot of that. We also played a lot of Spades, a lot of Hearts. These are trick-taking games of different sorts that I haven't played for a very long time. There was another one that was called Rook that was kind of popular in the 70s, and it had its own deck. I had a hard time finding people to play that with me other than in my family, and that one kind of died out. And then there were the precursor was Crazy Eights, right? The game where you're trying to go out. And then there was one that became really big and had its own deck with a couple interesting twists and teasers in there, like, draw 2 or change the color. And it was called Uno. And boy, did a lot of people enjoy playing that. My mom got really into it. My grandma got into it. We would have an Uno deck most of the time when we were going camping or something along those lines. And it was very easy for children to learn, I think, rather intuitive. And so that was an easy one to play. But the one that we probably played the most when I was a kid was Rummy. And it typically was Rummy 500. It's a pretty straightforward game. There's, all sorts of variations on Rummy. I'll tell you about Michigan Rummy in a bit, and there's also Gin Rummy, which I played for a little while. But Rummy 500 is one where you're essentially, forming runs and triplets of things, and you keep score, and when you get to 500, somebody's won. And that's basically all there is to the game, but it's very versatile. And you can play it over and over and over again. And it's quite fun. Sometimes you pick up a lot of cards, and that can be a little dangerous for you to do. So people, ooh, you took 10 cards, right? And it's a fun game. It's one of the few games that I still play in the present. My wife and I have started doing it in the last year, and it's good. It's training for the mind and keeps you sharp, and it's easy to do, and you can take the deck anywhere you want and play it. Now, things kind of changed for me the year that my dad got sick and died. And the reason that was the case was my grandfather and grandmother first came to stay with us at our house, on the border of Wales and Delafield. My grandfather, Sadler, my dad's dad, was, living with us as well, but he was, he was not very helpful, right? I mean, he'd burn pizzas, he'd drink all the time and stuff like that. Grandpa and Grandma Lemrees, on the other hand, were, my mom's mom and dad. They were able to help us out. Well, my mom was with my dad in Minnesota at the Mayo Clinic, where he was for about 3 months before he actually passed away. And so, we wound up learning to play games. And it was more me than my sister. My grandma decided that, I was 11 years old. It was time for me to learn one of the games that I saw people playing in the family all the time, Pinochle. Now, Pinochle is sort of like some of these other trick games, like Spades or Hearts, but it's got its own kind of deck. It's kind of complicated. It's got, you got to declare trump and you do bidding and stuff like that. So I was like growing up into real card games, you could say, right? And so for my grandma, I learned Pinochle. And then for my grandpa, I learned another card game that members of my family played as well, Cribbage. Cribbage is played on this board with pegs, and you move them to count your points. And, there's various ways to play it. You can play two-handed, three-handed, four-handed, five-handed. There's all different interesting variations. And it was something that a lot of the adults in my family did. So let me go on a brief discursus about that. Pinochle was a game that pretty much everybody who was an adult in my family, my branch of the Lemrees family. So we're counting my grandpa, my grandma, also my Uncle Hubert and Aunt Therese, who are grandpa and grandma's brothers and sisters. 2 brothers married 2 sisters and lived next door to them. And then, my Aunt Mary, my Aunt Bib, Uncle Scott, Uncle Aim, and then Uncle Scott's mom and dad's, the Echterlings, Father Art, who's my grandpa's brother. They all played that. My mom would play as well. So you could pretty much count on being able to get into a Pinochle game pretty easily, and very often they'd be played in my Uncle Hubert's basement on this big wooden table where we often did a lot of things. We spent a lot of time down there. And it was such a cool game, So getting to sit at the table and start to play. And we played all sorts, You could play two-handed, like my grandma taught me to play. There was three-handed, which now it starts to get a little bit more complicated. And then the real fun ones, four-handed with partners, and five-handed, six-handed, up to eight-handed, where you actually use 3 decks. I should mention, too, my Aunt Tunny, Therese, Grandma's sister, played, and she was very aggressive. Uncle Hubert was one of the only older people who didn't play. He preferred to go off and read books instead. But everybody else would, and it was a lot of fun, and it was really great sort of training for the mind, and thinking about how to set things up, and you learn how to estimate what you're going to make in terms of points, and learn how to work with your partner or against partners or whatever else you were doing. So it was really quite cool. Cribbage, on the other hand, the people who played that, my dad had played it a lot, but of course he was dying. Grandpa, Uncle Aim, Aunt Mary, Uncle Scott, and then occasionally other people would play it as well. Father Art would play, and those were the main people. So, there were several different cribbage boards. There was like a two-handed one, a three-handed one, a four-handed one. And we would often, and when we had some spare time, like waiting for dinner or something like that, or just killing some time during the day, we'd get out the cribbage board and we'd play. And again, it exercises certain parts of your mind that I think are quite good. Now, I never did find other people to play Pinochle with, except maybe one time in the Army. Cribbage was something that I could play with people all over because it's a little bit more common, and I have indeed played with quite a few people who aren't my family. In 8th grade, so that would have been like the summer, learning these two games would have been the summer between 6th and 7th grade. In 8th grade, we read a really interesting book, and I don't remember the name of it. All I really remember, it was a book about baseball players in sort of like, not Major League, but the thing below it, and their lifestyle. And one of the things that they would do, they played this legendary card game, essentially to like initiate and fleece money out of their friends, the new people, called Teg War, the exciting game without any rules. And you could make it be anything that you wanted. And I found this idea absolutely fascinating. Much, much, much later, my wife and I, when we were in our early flirtation phase, you could call it, we played a variant of Teg War without cards, but doing other things because it's adaptable. Coming back to cards, I did also learn to play gambling games. Occasionally we would play poker for pennies and nickels and stuff like that. You learn different variations of poker. I was never really a big gambler, in part because usually I don't make money when I do that, and I find that rather frustrating. And but playing poker could be fun for a while, provided the people don't take it too seriously, because when people can get very worked up about it. I also enjoyed playing blackjack, and we would often at Uncle John and Aunt Mary's place, the cards would come out, we'd get out pennies and nickels and dimes and play for small sums. And somebody would be the dealer, and we would play blackjack together. My Aunt Mary is actually a very big and good gambler herself. And so, we played those. But then there was another game I mentioned, Michigan Rummy. And this is played on kind of a board that's got like different spots for it. I don't remember exactly how it's played, but there's money to be made or lost in the game. And it's got some connections with Rummy 500, but also with other things as well. And we used to play that quite a lot, I remember, as a kid in my childhood and then my teens as well. But one of the games that became a big thing for me in college, and it didn't take too long for me to learn, is called Sheepshead. There's not a lot of people who play it outside of Wisconsin. It's also called Schafskopf, right? Which is just German for sheepshead. And I think some people play it in Germany and other German-speaking places. And it's a complicated game. It's sort of like Pinochle, except imagine if like you took Pinochle and turned it on its side and gave it a couple quick punches to deform it. Well, that is what Sheepshead is like. There's all these complicated, rules, and Trump, is set up in kind of a weird way. Unlike Pinochle, where any suit can be, Trump, it's actually fixed, and it's not just the diamonds. It's also, the kings and queens, or the jacks and queens. And I don't quite remember. I'd have to brush up on how to play it if I did it again. But I found this game fun as hell. And it's probably connected to the fact that I was having a great time in college. I'll tell you kind of a crazy story about Sheepshead. So when I was in my freshman year of college, they had these suites. So there was a dorm, and in this, instead of having just a big dorm thing with a room and you'd have a roommate, you'd have your own individual room, and there would be 4 of them in a suite, and then like a shared bathroom. And they had taken some of these suites and they converted them into what they called language suites. So they were trying a new pilot program. You would take some of the language classes, there would be a native speaker of that language there, and it was supposed to be like an immersive experience. So I got put into the French language suite because they knew that I spoke some French, and there were two other guys in it, a guy named Zhu, who was Hmong and who spoke a bit of French, and then there was Dan, who was supposed to be learning French, but always had a terrible accent and didn't really know that much. And then there was our teacher and person in charge, Cécile Revoltissot, who was probably in her mid-20s or so, which seemed very old to us at the time, and I don't think took her duties all that seriously. She liked drinking with us and hanging out and stuff like that. Eventually, Zhu left, and this girl, Faith, moved in, who actually had no intention of learning the language whatsoever. And so there was a French suite, a Spanish suite, a German suite, and then a Japanese suite. And in the Japanese suite, there was an old guy, and I don't remember his name, but the poor guy didn't know what he got himself in for. And then the other three people, there was Dave, who was like a, kind of computer geek and, D&D nerd and stuff like that. And also into metal. And, he and I made friends right away. Then there was Taco, which is what he went by, his name was actually Chris. He was an older guy in one of the frats, loved to party. He would actually end up moving off campus later on, and he was always kind of struggling with stuff, but he was a great person to know for like where the parties were going to be. And then there was Larry, and Larry was a townie. He was from Sheboygan. His mom actually worked at the school, and he eventually he ended up dropping out. Maybe with a lot of college students, they're not really ready to go to college, and so nobody moved into his room. Now, that set up an interesting opportunity. That room became known as the party room. So, 3 or 4 nights a week after all of our stuff was finished, probably starting around like 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock, somebody would buy a case of beer, and we had a table set up in there, and we'd come down with our nickels and dimes and quarters and stuff like that, and we would play Sheepshead. And play music, and so we were partying, but the partying was, we were getting drunk, of course, but it was mostly, we smoke up a storm too, because everything was allowed, you could smoke back then, was playing Sheepshead and getting excited about that and talking about it. And that poor Japanese guy at the end of the hall, he was so polite, and we probably made life kind of rough for him as a bunch of rowdy college students. And, the only thing that actually kind of pulled me out of there, because my grades were fine, I was getting my work done, I was actually also helping out with the soccer team, doing some training and stuff like that. I could afford to like screw off 4 nights a week in a place where we could party cheap and have a lot of fun playing this cards game. I wound up, having a girlfriend, and then she wasn't keen on me spending so much time with the guys doing that. But boy, was that a lot of fun. And I would also play Sheepshead with my friend Marshall, who unfortunately died quite young, but with his parents, and my friend Ed and all these other people. So Sheepshead, I have a lot of good memories about that. I did also learn Euchre, which is another trick game. Never was big on Euchre. If you've played Pinochle or Sheepshead, Euchre seems kind of pale in comparison. You don't get as many cards. There's not as much strategy involved. But a lot of people in my family, Uncle Aim became sort of a Euchre guy. And my cousin Chris and other people got really into Euchre. So, it became harder to find Sheepshead players, and a lot of people wanted to play Euchre instead. And I think I kind of fell out of playing cards as time went on. I got into graduate school. There wasn't that much time for doing it. There weren't that many people at Southern Illinois that I knew who were into it, like when I was in college. But it was something I would do with my family when I would come back on vacation, play some Pinochle, play some Cribbage. And I haven't done much of that for a long time other than playing the occasional Rummy 500 with my wife. But when we have more time, we're probably going to, start doing some other ones. Cribbage would be a lot of fun to do. There's others that perhaps would require getting involved with other people, and I don't know that we're going to do that. But I don't know how many hours I spent playing cards in my youth and 20s, but it's probably quite a lot, and a lot of good memories of just hanging out. And what's cool about cards is you don't need that much. In a lot of cases, just a deck and a table to play on and people who are interested. So there's my story about playing cards. Been a lot of fun going down memory lane with this one. And, you might have some interesting experiences of your own that you want to talk about in the comments or, shoot your own video about it. That could be kind of cool.